Welcome to The Change, a podcast about the changes in life that can shake, break, and make us. I'm Laura, a 44-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum who has until recently always loved change.
And I'm Kathy, 52-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum. And change is actually my kryptonite. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia on which this podcast is recorded and recognise continuing connections to lands, waters and communities.
We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present. Hello, Kathy. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How about you? What are you up to?
I'm pretty good. I'm feeling the heat. It's very hot today, but I am interested to talk to our guest today. I have spoken with Louise before, but Kathy, tell us more about this wonderful woman we're about to interview.
Yes, we have the fabulous Louise Wilkinson coming on. She is a keynote speaker. She's a master of ceremonies. She's a radio and podcast host, and she's also a life coach.
She's
She's
got
a
a few.
seasoned performer. She's
Yep.
an entrepreneur. I don't think there's anything that Louise doesn't have in her bow, but
Yeah.
she owns a successful performing arts school. She stage manages key events for the local council, sporting organisations, corporate clients, and she has even floor managed a LA Galaxy game hosting David Beckham. I
Oh
mean,
my
seriously.
God. Yeah,
I
she's
know.
doing the
Can't wait.
things, isn't she? She really is. And she's
She really is.
absolute little pocket rocket, and she's completely gorgeous to boot as well. So very excited to welcome Louise.
Hi, Louise. You wear many hats. You're a dance studio owner, you're a performer, you're a radio host. My goodness, a mum. You must just love change. Like, how do you do it all?
Look, I'm a firm believer, Kathy, that if we fail to change, we fail to thrive. So I embrace change and I see every new opportunity as a challenge. So that's sort of my philosophy towards it. And yeah, life has certainly thrown me a lot of opportunities for massive change. So
Oh, that's so good. I think change is just hard as we get older in lots of ways, and we talk about that, in lots of the different women that we've spoken to. But I think to embrace it is key, isn't it? So yes, good on you for being that woman. And today, Louise, we're mostly going to be talking to you about the change you went through, finding out that you were adopted at age 34 and discovering that you had a whole other family. So we thought maybe you could start by telling us what had been happening in the lead up to getting this letter in the mail that revealed this huge family secret.
yeah, sure. So, yeah, it was quite dramatic the way that it went down. So, basically, I'd been born in Canberra, had two beautiful, loving parents, an older brother who was 13 years my senior. And, growing up, I sort of always thought that I looked a little bit different to them. My brother is 6'2", I'm 5 foot flat. And this was sort of in the back of my head. I sort of thought, oh, look, I'm just the square peg in a round hole, I guess, in my family. And so out of the blue, one day I was at work and I got this letter and it was marked private and confidential. And my father, who is very hands-on and still to this day helps me out with my business. And he, when we opened the premises, actually saw this letter and he thought I was single at the time. And he thought, oh, maybe it's a fella. So he, he gave me the letter. And I've just opened it and it's, are you Louise Wilkinson, born on the 25th of December, 1975? I gave a child up for adoption at that time. I've been looking for her and, I'm wondering if this is you. Kind regards, Peggy O'Brien. And when I read that letter, I mean, there was this moment of clarity. Everything clicked. And I just knew way down deep inside that this was actually correct. So, and I just looked at my dad and I said, Dad, am I adopted? And I've never seen the color drain out of somebody's face. Yeah, he just went grey on the spot. And then tried to put Pandora back in the box. So he said, "Oh, give me the letter, that must be a mistake," and put it in his back pocket.
Oh.
So as the hours went on and this started to sink in, I said to Dad, "Look, Dad, I'm gonna have to have the letter back.
Mm.
All right?" So he reluctantly handed it over, and he's a Northern English man, and they went through the war and they went through the
Mm.
depression and that sort of thing. So they're very good at just sort of turning a blind eye to actually what's going on. So
Yeah.
he was sort of very quiet for a couple of days, and then I texted him a couple of days later. I'd actually gone the night after. I went to see my brother, and I just said, "Look, I've got something to show you." And I just handed him the letter. And he said to me, "Yes, look, it is true. And I was going to tell you when mum and dad had passed over, but I respected their wishes not to tell you while they were alive." And it was in their defense, because when I tell people about this, their first thing is, "Were you angry that they kept it from you?"
Mm.
Given the time and the way that the adoption system worked in Australia in
Mm.
1975, the advice was the adoption was closed. So the government actually issued a birth certificate with my adoptive parents' names on it, and my other
Mm.
one disappeared. It sits
Wow.
behind in the records. And their advice at the time was that it would cause psychological harm to tell the child that they were adopted. So
Mm.
if there was no reason to tell them, their advice at the time was to not tell the child. Now that whole scheme is actually lumped in with the stolen generation,
Mm.
because the government have since realised that that was probably not the best advice.
Mm.
But they were sort of going with what they were told by the adoption agency. And I guess my dad actually shared a story that he had a phone call from a couple that they had met through the adoption process, and this father tracked my dad down and said, "Have you told Louise?" And he said, "No, I haven't." And I would have been about 7 at this age.
Mm.
And he said, "Well, we went against the advice and we told our son, and he's had basically a complete mental breakdown. So I just
Mm.
wanted to reach out to you and say, if you haven't, try and avoid it." So that was Dad, signed, sealed, delivered. I don't want to hurt
Yeah.
my daughter.
Mm.
So when it came out, obviously it was incredibly shocking, but at the same time, I somehow knew
Mm.
Mm.
there was something not quite right. And so it brought a lot of clarity when I actually opened this letter. And
Mm.
that sixth sense, you don't know how you know, but you know. And
Mm.
that was certainly my experience.
So in those weeks, kind of after, like just those initial, like that really initial period after that, how did that change? Like obviously huge shock. Like it changes a lot of things, I imagine, even though as you so eloquently say that you had a sixth sense and you obviously had a very firm understanding of who you were and very loved and very, all of those things because you eloquently described that you understand why your parents made the decision to do what they did, And I imagine lots of people are not quite as understanding as what you have been. So how was it in those really initial first few weeks and months?
Yeah, well, certainly in those first couple of days, I just wanted to get an understanding. So after a couple of days, I texted my dad and I said, "Look, you got to let mum know that I've got this letter," because I
Mm.
don't think he had at that point. And I said, "I want to come over and I want to hear my story from my family who love
Mm.
me unconditionally and have raised me." I think in some weird way, being 34, I was at a period in my life where I'd had 2 children of my own. I understood what it was like to want to protect your children at all costs. And I was in this period where I had separated from my husband 2 years prior, And I think that in some weird way, I actually had the space to be able to hold it at that
Mm.
point. So what I did was I, first of all, because I can't imagine what it would be like as my mother to send that letter and then have no response.
Mhm.
So I emailed her, her email address was on the letter, and I said, look, this is me, but I just need to let you know that I wasn't aware that I was adopted. I need to process this with my family. I need you to give me a little bit of time to
Mhm.
process that. So I felt that she, had reached out and put herself right out on a limb. I didn't want to leave her hanging, but at the same
Mm.
time, I really needed to sit with it for a few weeks.
Mm.
So I went and spoke to my family and they told me the story, and there were tears and there were hugs and there were, you know, it was actually a beautiful conversation.
Mm.
And my mum had sort of, so my dad was very, very set on me not knowing. Her parents, so my grandparents, who I loved and adored, and spent every weekend there in the garden with granddad. They were very set on, she's happy, she's one of us. So they were all for not telling me as well. But mum had this, as a mother, I guess, had
Mm.
this thing inside her. She said, I raised a glass to your birth mother every Christmas Day
Mm.
because I knew that she would be suffering today.
Mm.
And so I think it brought her, she passed away in 2014. So this was a couple of years prior to that. And I think it brought her a lot of peace to know that I had the full picture.
Mm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it was a lot to process. But at the same time, as I said, I had that feeling inside. Everything sort of clicked into place. And I had a really beautiful and transparent discussion with my family.
Mm.
Um, and I did say to them, look, the respect that I have for you is so great. If you don't want me to pursue this, if you don't want me to, go down this road, you're my family. That's never going to change. I will respect that decision if you're uncomfortable with it. And my mum said, no, you need to know your story. You need to know where you came from. We're behind you. So yeah, it was actually very beautiful. And in a way, there was a peace that came over me with all that upheaval. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, it seemed like all the puzzle pieces sort of just fitted into place.
I just need to know what happened next, because obviously your birth mother, you said before that you reached out, so she was aware that you didn't know. Your mum and dad were, they knew what was happening. What was the first meeting with your birth mum like, and how did that all go down?
Okay, so probably about a month after I found out, I actually picked up the phone. I called her, and it was her wedding anniversary. So she was
Mm.
at home having a dinner with her husband Jim, and I picked up the phone. I said, "Oh, hi Peggy, this is Louise," and we had this chat. And she is actually based in Bathurst, so we actually made a plan that she would come to Newcastle, and we would have a lunch. So she booked into the apartments on Hunter Street in Newcastle, and I went and met her at the hotel room. And when I walked in, the first thing that she did was she picked up my little finger, because I'm double jointed in my fingers, and she could remember, because she actually was one of the lucky ones in that whole closed adoption. Often there was a sheet between the face of the birth mother and the child,
Mm.
and the birth mother never actually got to see the child at all.
Mm.
She had a very compassionate midwife, and she was allowed to hold me, and she was allowed to give me my first bath
Oh,
before she left
wow.
the hospital. And she can remember that my little finger was double jointed,
Mm.
and she picked up my little finger and she checked that it was double
Mm.
jointed. So that was a real moment.
Mm.
So then we went out to lunch and we talked for hours, and we got on like a house on fire. And then later, my parents came into Newcastle and met Peggy as well. The night before, I must admit, I did freak out, and I rang my
Mhm.
parents and I said, this is opening Pandora's box and I don't want things to change. I think I'm going to pull the pin. And Mum said,
Mm.
Louise, you're going to regret doing that. So let's go through with it. We're here. If you need to call us, we'll be there in a flash. But just let's see how this goes. So
Mm.
they were very supportive through the whole thing. And yeah, so that was definitely a moment, meeting her. And there were these very weird, it's nature versus nurture. So we had a lot of the same mannerisms. We put
Mm.
our bags down the same way. We
Mhm.
picked our knives and forks up the same way. So that was very profound, just noticing those little things.
Mm. It's so interesting what you said there about you didn't want things to change, because I just can't imagine your whole sense of self has been, switched out overnight, really,
Overnight,
with
yeah.
the arrival of that letter. And
Mm.
you've suddenly got a whole other family that you had no idea that you had. And so I can completely understand how you would have had that freak out and gone, no, no, I don't want it. I'm happy. I've got a beautiful family. It would have been so challenging. You've met Peggy, and now your parents have met Peggy, but how was their relationship, and how did your relationship with your mum and dad who raised you, and who you still, they are your mum and dad. How did that change that relationship?
Look, I'm a big daddy's girl, and I think dad, to an extent, had actually blocked out the fact that I was adopted. I was his. Like, that was it, hands down. So he struggled with it. Um,
Mm.
but I believe that it actually brought my mum and myself closer, um, because I'd look at my mum and I couldn't see myself in her.
Mm.
you know, even down to things like, I had massive bazookas and she
Mhm.
had a size B, she was 5'10". I was 5 foot flat. She was fair. I was dark. So I couldn't connect with her and I didn't know what it was. Once that was out, I could connect with her just person to person. And I wasn't trying to find those genetic things in her.
Mm.
So it actually improved our relationship going forward from that point. And I think that she felt a whole heap of relief because I think that she had a fair bit of guilt that I didn't know. She really wanted
Mm.
me to know.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, you're a mum too, so you would be, yeah, thinking of her, and just such a difficult scenario, isn't it?
Mm.
And what about your dad? You met your birth father, is that right?
I did. So that was a whole Peggy had actually been looking for me for 10 years, but because I
Mhm.
was married, my name had obviously changed. So
Mm.
she had issues looking for me. And it wasn't until I actually went back to my maiden name and I had a website that she picked it up in a web search. But when she first started her search, she did actually make contact with my birth father and she said, I'm going to look for for our child. And he said, well, look, I would really like to know,
Mhm.
when you make contact. So I had his name and I had, you know, where he was from and that sort of thing. And he had three other brothers. And so I couldn't find contact details for him, but I found contact details for his brother. And so I sent a letter to the brother, and he was a GP in Wollongong. But what I hadn't actually realized was those were the two brothers that didn't talk. So,
Oh.
so he sort of held on to that letter. And then my adoptive mother's sister actually found my father. And
Wow.
yeah, because she was curious too. So she actually found it. So I sent a letter. He was working at Wollongong Hospital. I had to ring first because I wanted to make sure, obviously, that a secretary wasn't going to open the letter.
Mm.
So I had to call and I spoke to his personal assistant and I said, look, this is a personal family matter. I just wanted to make sure that, if I send this, that he will be the recipient and da 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 da. And she was sussing me out. I think she thought that I was a debt collector or,
Mhm.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Yeah.
was in health, that it was something litigious or whatever. Anyway,
Mm.
I got the letter through and sent it to him. And yeah, he actually then called me. His PA at the time was actually his partner. And she had
Oh,
actually
okay.
said to me, if you'd have said, it's a personal family matter, because I just said it was a personal matter. If
Yeah.
I'd have said it was a personal family matter, she knew all about me and she would have
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then he came up to Newcastle and we had a dinner at Scratchley's, and same thing, we took our steak the same way and we had a love of seafood, and he was quite little, and look, no DNA test needed there. I looked exactly like him,
Mhm.
Wow.
exactly
Yeah.
like him. He knew from
Yeah.
the moment I walked into the building who I was. Sort of introduced me. The first thing that he gave me was a cross that I still have around my neck, because he is Italian, and gave me my first sort of Italian cross. So that
Oh,
was our first meeting. And then he said, "Look, you've got to meet the family." Uh, so off I go to Wollongong, and he'd given me the address. And I remember pulling up to this address, and it's on the bluff at Port Kembla in Wollongong, with a full view of the ocean and this
beautiful.
3-story house. And here I am in my Ford, feeling like Orphan Annie, looking up at this house, going, "Oh my God." Anyway, it was like a scene out of Looking for Ella Brandy. And
Oh,
Mm.
there was this mad Italian, huge family. My cousins looked exactly like me. They were all
Mhm.
my height. And that was profound. I remember shedding
mm,
tears with that, because I just looked at them and it was like looking at a mirror. And in actual fact, my birth father had actually found a picture of me online and sent it to his brother, and his brother thought that it was his daughter.
wow.
That is how much we looked alike.
Mm.
So, they took me out to the Italian restaurant, and then, the next day they're making salami
Mm.
and and tomato sauce. And yeah, it was just a huge experience. But they embraced me. Leno's mother had passed away, a few years previous, and on her deathbed, she had actually said to one of the other brothers, "Leno's daughter will find us, and when she finds us, she's one of us."
Oh, it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
So that was amazing to sort of meet all of them. There's a lot to learn, a lot to process, a lot to
Mm.
take in, and a lot of these profound moments where you see yourself in
Mm,
those people. But sort of settling into it, I'm very grateful that I was brought up with the family that I've been brought up with. And I have a really strong relationship with both my birth mother and my birth father, but there's only 16 years difference between us. So,
Yeah.
wow.
certainly my parents are my parents. They're who
Mm,
I look to as my parents, and that never wavered through the
mm.
whole thing. So it's a different relationship that I have with them. It's a
Yeah.
close relationship, but it's a different one.
It's funny, my husband is not adopted, but his parents moved from Scotland to Australia when he was a very small boy.
Yeah.
He was about 3, and so he has no, like, well, had no memory of his Scottish family. I mean, they talked about them and they, phone calls and all of those sorts of things once a year because costs and all of that.
Yeah.
But he went back to Scotland, before we got married, and he didn't really know what to expect, and he got off the plane, and one of his uncles met him in London, like, at Heathrow, and he was like, "Oh, how will I know? How will I know?" And he said he walked through the airport and he saw this man, and he's like, "Oh, there's my uncle." And he had no, and it's like that, the way you describe, when you met your family, like your biological family for the first time, you knew exactly who they were and you knew exactly where you'd come from because of those, like, you just knew, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a soul tie.
Mm.
yeah, Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
profound. And has it sort of taught you anything about yourself? Other than, you're at 34, you're already quite a sort of well-developed person, human, but by that stage, you've learnt all this new stuff so fast about who you were and where you've come from. What's the sort of lasting legacy of that been for you?
Look, I guess just that I am the product of a lot of different influences, bloodlines, and all of those people have made me who I am. I have a Northern English sense of humor because that's how I was brought up. But I have, uh, yeah, like right from being 3 or 4, give me a salami and a piece of cheese over a McDonald's frappe any day of the week. It's just this whole mishmash of influences that have made me who I am, and I understand that now.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, we come into this world alone and we leave alone. And while these people are influences and that sort of thing, I think that I had a fairly strong sense of self. So it helped me to understand who I was, but it didn't shake who I was, if that makes sense, at my core.
Yeah, I think just talking to you can just tell that your sense of self is very strong, and even the fact that you can embrace change and you're very, yeah, solid in that sense, I think, which would have been incredibly helpful at a time to have such a big change in
Mm.
your life at that stage. But yeah, it's an amazing story. Like, it's just incredible that that letter just set off this chain of events. And then just coming back to like you personally, having gone through all of this and the busy woman that you are there any changes, big or small, that you still want to make in your life? Whether that's to do with family or not. Even your kids have grown up now, right? Is that right?
They have, and I am actually a month into my grandparent journey.
Wow.
Wow,
How beautiful.
congratulations.
Yeah, my daughter very much followed in my footsteps. I had her when I was 23. My husband had 2 kids from his previous marriage, and he was 32. My daughter is 23. Her partner has 2 kids from his previous marriage. It's 32. So that's identical. So here I am, just about to turn 47 next week. And I have a beautiful granddaughter, Josie. And that's been such a huge revelation. Seeing my daughter become a mother has been huge. It's fantastic. I mean, you love them exactly the same as you love your children. And guess what, ladies? You can give them back.
Oh, that sounds beautiful.
It does sound beautiful.
That's been amazing. I guess I'm starting to reach the point in my life. What I do is very full on. So I've just come off the back of a week of 3 major performance events, all separate across 7 days. And physically, that takes a lot out of you because you're
Mhm.
lifting sets and props and organizing and all of that sort of thing. I'm starting to get to the point where I guess that I want my work to be a little bit more physical, less physical. Sorry,
Yeah.
and so it's sort of navigating through that, bumping up my podcasting and my public speaking and those sort of things, and maybe winding back the dance a little bit. I have very capable staff that can probably do the heavy lifting. I think I've earned my stripes there. There will be, I can see in the next few years that there will be some changes that I will kind of wind back, and I want the space to be able to enjoy life a little bit more. Being in entertainment, we work when everybody else is having a good time. That's the way that it
Yeah.
works.
That kind of really brings us to our last question. Our podcast is called The Change, in part as a reference to that kind of midlife experience of all women, whether it be perimenopause or the actual menopause. We'd love to know about what your feelings or experience with the change is.
Yeah. Well, I'm just starting to hit that. And I'm so grateful to both of you for actually bringing this conversation to the table. And I think you guys will resonate with this as well. We are from a generation where it just wasn't talked about.
Mhm.
And so I had no idea, for example, that perimenopause can last 10 years.
Mhm.
You
I
know,
know. Yeah.
that menopause is one day, and it's the day that you hit that year mark after your last period. So opening this discussion up and talking to people about the changes is absolutely necessary. We don't
Mhm.
have enough information about it, and we don't share about it. So, yeah, I'm starting to hit it now, and I'm noticing, I've always been a cold frog, and I'm noticing that that is sort of not the case at times anymore. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's sort of been my first indicator that I'm starting to hit that. And yeah, I guess it's confronting on a psychological level, I guess, because
Mm.
if you use the maiden mother crone, we're kind of moving into that crone, but 50 is the new 30 as well. So,
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
there's kind of a pressure to sort of, still look young and be vibrant and do all the things that we used to do, when we were in our 30s and early 40s. But I'm kind of feeling that my body is letting me know that, perhaps that isn't as realistic as it was 10 years ago, Louise.
Mm.
And we might need to make some life changes around that.
Yeah.
That's so
It's
true.
yeah.
You say maiden mother crow. Laura and I like to say first, second, third act. And we like to say that we're moving into our third act, which is, rather than crone, sort of, which might be a little bit negative, be
But that's what
a
it was
little bit more
traditionally, right?
positive. Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah,
crone. Oh
absolutely.
gosh, it's such a terrible anything crone, hag, stage. No one wants to be known as that, do they?
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah,
just
look,
not.
it just,
No.
do we get a complimentary cauldron? Is
Well, that
That'd
would
be
be great.
great.
Just
Yes.
like that crone word, it feels
Yeah.
like it should be, like
Yes.
stirring the
Witch's
pot.
brew and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah,
and being in the performing arts, I can tell you that third act is
Mm.
always the best.
It
yeah.
is. It's the most
Absolutely.
exciting.
It's where it all comes
Mm.
together and
Mm.
yeah, so I certainly am excited about my third act.
Mm.
And we're hoping that we can bring a bit more joy to people, women, who are moving into the change, and understand that third act and it's not so scary. I mean, we all have to go through it and some
That's
people go
that.
through
It's
it
normal.
a
Mm.
little bit easier than others, but we shouldn't be afraid of it.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely not. There's this sense of, as well, like moving into this era, is that, look at all the wisdom we have and look at the,
Mm.
the life experiences we have and how rich our lives are. And I guess that this is kind of a little bit of a flag to say, okay, you've done the hard yards.
Mm.
You've done
Absolutely.
the teenage years, you've done the mothering, you've built your career. Okay, let's just sit in this and look at all of the stuff that we have now that we can bring to the next generation,
Mm.
and our wisdom and our life experience. And that's something to be excited about.
Yeah. No, it really is. Thank you, Louise. You're
Thank you so
amazing.
much.
Yeah.
No
Thank you for
problem
talking
at
to
all.
us. Louise, she's just got such an
Oh,
interesting story, doesn't she?
there
I
is just
loved it.
so
Mm.
much so much in that.
Mm.
I just can't imagine. Interestingly, she always felt like there
Mm.
was
Had that sixth
something,
sense.
you know,
Mm. Mm.
and yet she still had a strong sense of self. And I think that came through because she was very accepting of her
Mm.
parents' decisions.
Mhm.
I think that comes from being secure in who you are. And
Mm. I
yeah.
think it's testament to the fact she's obviously a beautiful human and
Mm,
very well-rounded person. Obviously, had a great childhood with her parents, her mum and dad, who didn't turn out to be her biological mum and dad, but were very much her family. And I think they did a great job of raising her clearly. And yeah, I really like that part of the story that there was it could have gone so terribly, really, couldn't it?
mhm,
And how she says that people always ask her about whether or not she's angry, and she's not. She's very insightful in that sense. I thought
mm.
that she could reflect and go, well, at the time, these were the things that they were told by the government, and you
Yeah,
shouldn't be
absolutely.
telling your child in case upset them or create problems for them in the future. So I think she was very understanding, very measured, and just a kind of lovely person.
Yeah, for me, it was a really interesting chat with somebody who found out much later in life that
Mm.
they were adopted, and
Huge change, isn't it? To go
huge,
through
huge,
in your
massive.
mid-30s. Yeah.
And just how she processed that. And
Mm.
just as you say, it's testament to her
Mm.
character and
Mm.
to how she just kind of took it in a stride and loved
and just
everybody.
added,
And
the love just increased, didn't it? She just suddenly found these new aspects of herself and her family and just invited them into her life in such an open and warm way, which was really fascinating. And just a final point, which I thought was really great, was how she spoke about becoming a grandmother at 46. And that's just, something, she's got more love in her life. She's, her daughter's just had a baby. And I think that's incredible, to become a grandmother at 46 is quite young.
Oh my goodness.
She'll be the most glam granny ever. So I thought that was lovely.
Won't she just? Yeah, it was a beautiful ending to that story. So I'm so glad we had her on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for listening to The Change, a fully independent podcast. Whether you're seeking inspiration, curious about change, or just here for the great banter, we'd love you to make The Change your new go-to podcast.
And even better, send us your voice notes or questions about change. We'll use them on the show. Email us at changepod2023@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at _change_pod. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more on The Change.